They say words don't leave bruises, but whoever said that never heard their own daughter-in-law look them in the eyes and say, "You're just the babysitter." That sentence didn't slice, it sank. Slow, deep, quiet, like cold water filling the cracks of an old heart. I remember the moment perfectly. The smell of milk bottles warming on the counter, the hum of the dryer in the hallway, little pink socks folded neatly on the arm of the couch, and me, standing there 58 years old, holding my granddaughter like she was the last soft thing left in the world. Before I go on, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? It's always comforting to know whose hearts these stories reach. Ohio, Texas, New York, maybe somewhere far across the sea. Every name, every place, it reminds me I'm not speaking into emptiness. When my son and his wife moved in, they said it would only be for a few months. They needed time to get settled, they said, and I believed them. I told myself it would be nice, family close again, laughter in the kitchen, little footsteps in the hall, the kind of noise that keeps a house alive. And at first it was beautiful. Emma, my granddaughter, was learning to crawl. Her laughter filled the rooms I once thought would stay quiet forever. My son would come home tired from work, smile, and kiss the top of my head. "Mom, I don't know what we'd do without you," he'd say. Those words, they were sunlight to me. But sunlight fades. Sometimes all at once. It started small. Her sigh when I offered help, her frown when I hummed while cooking. Then one morning, I found a note stuck to the fridge. It read, "Lunch for Emma at noon. Please don't use the good pans." No signature, no thank you. Just orders. If you've ever helped someone you love and somehow ended up feeling invisible for it, you already understand this ache. Write me a small heart in the comments if you know what that kind of silence feels like. It helps, somehow, to know we've all stood in the same quiet. Days turned into weeks, and the warmth in the house cooled. Conversation stopped when I entered a room. Laughter followed when I left it. And I, too polite, too hopeful, kept pretending not to notice. Then came the evening I will never forget. I was setting the table, smoothing the same cloth I'd used for every family dinner for years. She walked in, leaned against the doorway, and said, "You don't have to do that. You're just the babysitter." For a moment, the whole world went silent. Even Emma stopped babbling. The fork slipped from my hand and hit the floor, the sound sharp as truth. I looked at my son. I waited for him to say something, anything. He didn't. He just reached for the salt and asked if we had enough. That silence, it told me everything. I didn't cry that night. I sat on the porch wrapped in an old quilt, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. There's something honest about an Ohio night. It doesn't let you lie to yourself for long. I thought about the birthdays I'd worked double shifts to pay for, the winters I'd gone without heat so he could have new shoes, the years of cooking, cleaning, hoping, loving. And now, after all of it, I was just the babysitter. Pain eventually stops screaming. It starts whispering instructions. The next morning, while dusting the shelves, I found an old folder tucked behind a row of photo albums. Inside, the deed to the house, edges yellowed, but the name clear. Owner, Margaret Lewis. That's me. My name, written in ink that didn't fade. I slid it beside me on the couch, not out of anger, out of reminder that I still existed. If you are still here listening to me, maybe you've been through this too, the slow erasing of who you are in your own home. Stay with me, because what happened after that folder found me changed everything. She started introducing me to guests as the babysitter. Oh, that's Margaret. She helps with Emma. Helps. As if I hadn't raised the man she married, as if my years of sacrifice had become just another favor. The laughter around me that day didn't sting, it burned. And inside that burn, something clear began to form. That night, I opened my old ledger, the one where I used to track bills and birthdays, and I wrote a new page. At the top, I wrote what I still own. Line 1, my name. Line 2, my house. Line 3, my voice. Before I tell you what came next, if this story already feels close to your heart, subscribe. Not for me, but for the stories like this that deserve to be remembered. Every click tells me these words matter to someone. The next morning, I watched them drive away, her in the passenger seat, my son at the wheel, little pink hand pressed against the window. When the car disappeared down the street, I looked around the quiet house and whispered, "Just the babysitter, huh?" Then I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, a man I hadn't spoken to in years. When he answered, I said, "Mr. Jenkins, I think it's time we talked about some papers." He paused. "What kind of papers, Margaret?" And I said softly, but clearly, "The kind that remind people who really built this home." The day after that call, I woke up before the sun. The house was still, quiet in a way that felt almost sacred. For once, there were no footsteps, no voices, no baby cries. Just me, the tick of the clock, and a kind of calm I hadn't felt in years. I poured myself a cup of coffee and watched the first light stretch across the kitchen counter. For years, that light had felt like mercy. That morning, it felt like permission. I put on my coat and drove downtown to Mr. Jenkins' office. I'd known him since my husband passed. He was the one who helped me keep this house back then, when I almost lost it. He looked older now, a little slower, but when I sat across from him, he smiled the same way he always did. "Margaret," he said, "what brings you in today?" I told him everything, every quiet insult, every moment of silence that spoke louder than words, every night I'd gone to bed feeling smaller. He didn't interrupt once, just listened, nodding, his pen hovering above the pad until I finished. When I stopped talking, he asked gently, "So, what would you like to do?" I looked down at my hands. They trembled slightly, not from fear, but from release. I said, I want to make sure the only person who ever truly looked at me with love, my granddaughter, has something that's hers, something safe, something that can't be taken or twisted. He leaned back, thoughtful. A trust? I nodded. He smiled softly. Let's get to work then. If you're still with me, tell me in the comments, have you ever reached that point? The one where your pain finally turns into clarity? It's strange how power can sound like silence when it first returns to you. We spent hours drafting the papers. Every line, every clause, every signature space, the house, the savings, even my husband's old pension, everything folded carefully into Emma's future, locked until she turned 21. I wanted to cry, not out of sadness, but out of knowing that I was finally doing something not for my son, not for his wife, but for me and for the little girl who'd one day understand. When Mr. Jenkins slid the final page toward me, he said, "Are you sure, Margaret? Once you sign, it's done." I smiled. I've been sure since the day she called me the babysitter. The pen felt heavy in my hand. It wasn't ink I was writing with. It was every tear I'd swallowed, every apology I never received. When the nib touched paper, something inside me unclenched. I signed. Mr. Jenkins stood, offered his hand, and said quietly, "You've done something remarkable today." And I said, "No, I've just remembered who I am." Driving home, the sky was bruised with evening light. The trees looked like dark silhouettes, the way they do in November when everything's stripped bare, but still standing. That's how I felt, stripped, but standing. At dinner, the air was thick. I could sense her eyes on me, searching for something to accuse. She asked, "What's with this smile?" I said, "Oh, just took care of a little paperwork." She frowned. "What kind of paperwork?" I said, "House things, boring old lady stuff." She didn't laugh. Maybe she saw something in my face that made her uneasy. If you're listening right now, what would you have said? Would you have told her the truth or kept it quiet like I did? Tell me in the comments. I love reading how differently people would handle these moments. For a few days, nothing happened. Then the letter arrived. It came in a white envelope, stamped official, addressed to me, but sitting on the hallway table. I hadn't seen it yet. She had, and she opened it. When I came in from the garden, her face was pale. She was holding the document like it had burned her hands. She said, "What is this?" I said, "You opened my mail." She said, You changed the ownership? You gave the house away?" And I said, "I gave it back to the family it belongs to." My son walked in mid-argument, confused. "What's going on?" She waved the paper at him. "She signed everything to Emma." He turned to me. "Mom, why would you do that?" I looked him in the eyes, the same eyes that used to look at me with gratitude, and said, "Because love doesn't mean letting people walk through you." He stared, speechless. She started shouting, something about betrayal, about how they'd made this home theirs. And I said quietly, "You were right. I was just the babysitter, and this is how babysitters take care of what's precious." If you're still listening, leave me a little moon in the comments so I know you made it this far. This part of the story, it's where everything changed. They stopped talking to me after that night. Meals went silent. Doors started closing louder. Even Emma sensed the distance. She crawled towards me and her mother would pull her back. It broke my heart, but I'd already chosen my peace. A week later, my son said they were moving out. He didn't look at me when he said it. He just stood by the door holding a box. He said, "We'll find our own place. We'll manage." I nodded. "I know you will." She passed by without a word, just one sharp look that said everything. When the door shut behind them, the house exhaled. For the first time in years, I could hear my own heartbeat again. I walked to the living room, sat on the couch, and looked at the deed folder still resting on the table, the same one I'd found weeks ago. I whispered, "We did it." Then, almost out of habit, I checked the baby monitor, still sitting by my chair, quiet now. I laughed softly. Guess I'm off duty. If this story touches something in you, please hit the like button. It helps this little corner of the internet find others who need these stories too. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what happens next. Because what came after that goodbye wasn't revenge. It was something softer, something I never expected. After they left, the house stood still. Empty rooms have their own kind of sound, like memory breathing. For the first few nights, I kept expecting footsteps on the stairs, the clatter of dishes, Emma's soft giggle down the hall. But silence can be kind, too. It lets you hear yourself again. I spent that first morning opening the curtains wide. Dust danced in the light, and I laughed at how beautiful something so ordinary could look when no one's there to criticize it. I brewed coffee, not for anyone else, just for me. And I sat by the window where I used to watch the mailbox, waiting for visits that never came. Now, I just watched the wind move through the maple tree. For the first time in years, I didn't feel old. I felt free. If you're still with me, tell me in the comments. When was the last time you did something purely for yourself? No guilt, no apology. I love reading those moments. They remind me we all start over at different ages. Days slowed into a gentle routine. I began cooking again, not out of duty, but joy. I made the meals I used to love, simple stews, cornbread, peach jam. Sometimes I'd plate an extra serving out of habit, then smile and wrap it for the freezer. One afternoon, I found a box of my husband's old records. I wiped off the dust, set one on the player, and let the crackle fill the room. It was our wedding song, soft, steady, patient. I danced alone in the living room, bare feet on the wooden floor, and for a moment, I was 20 again. It's funny. People think strength looks loud, but real strength often sounds like laughter in an empty house. A few weeks later, a small envelope arrived in the mail. No return address, just my name written in a child's uneven handwriting. Inside was a drawing, a stick figure grandmother holding hands with a little girl in front of a house. On the bottom, in bright crayon letters, it said, "I love you, Grandma Babysitter." On the back, a photo. Emma holding a tiny silver key. The key to this house, the one I'd locked away in her trust. I pressed the photo to my heart and closed my eyes. That was the moment I knew I'd done the right thing. Not because of revenge, not because of pride, but because one day, when she's old enough to understand, she'll know love can protect quietly. If you're still listening, leave me a little dandelion in the comments, so I know you made it this far. It's strange, isn't it? How stories like ours find strangers who feel like family. Spring came early that year. The snow melted into soft puddles at the curb, and the first robins perched on the fence like tiny promises. I planted marigolds along the porch the way my mother used to. Their color, bright gold, looked almost like forgiveness. Sometimes neighbors stop by. They ask where my son is, and I just smile and say, "He's living his life." They nod. No gossip, no pity, just understanding. Because in the end, peace isn't about getting even, it's about getting quiet. Every night now, I sit on that same porch with a blanket across my knees. The same spot where I once cried into the dark. But now, I listen to the crickets, breathe deep, and whisper, "Thank you," for the lesson, for the strength, for the ending that doesn't hurt anymore. If this story has touched you, even a little, leave a heart or a word below. I read every one of them, and you'd be surprised how your words comfort others who are still in the middle of their storm. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. Stay with us. Because here on True Life Stories, we don't just tell stories, we remember them. We pass them on, so no one feels alone in their silence. Thank you for listening to mine. I was never just the babysitter. I was the keeper of a home, the writer of a legacy, and now, finally, the author of my own peace.